And I would have favored early on putting a halt to Serbian intervention in Bosnia. This is, although not necessarily with American ground forces. Therefore, I believe that the introduction of American ground forces and of NATO military forces for that purpose is first an unprecedented extension of NATO authority, an extraordinary assertion of international law, and a dangerous precedent for America.
I mean, I've been on the phone every day this week speaking with Albanian leaders, and maybe we can say, as some do, well, it's not going to spread. Well, I think there is a connection between Bosnia and Kosovo. I think you look back at, and maybe it's not all about Milosevic, as Secretary Kissinger says, but a great deal of it's about Milosevic. He started all this, and I feel sorry for the Serbs. So my view is that this is a NATO action that we should participate in.
The Department of Balkan Affairs has just reported to our committee that Mr. Holbrooke has reported to the State Department that his mission with Mr. Milosevic today has been a complete failure. I just wanted to bring you up to date. Please proceed, Ms. Cloyes.
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for this opportunity to testify before the committee, and I would also like to commend you personally for your leadership in continuing to address the conflict in Kosova. I believe that America's decision to deploy U.S. troops to Kosova will be based in no small measure on how the Clinton administration continues to spin the roots and the blame for the conflict in the minds of the American people. Our State Department has invested great effort in making Americans think that the conflict in Kosova is a never-ending civil war over territory driven by religion on the part of two parties equally culpable for the bloodshed. One party, Serbia, the representative of a sovereign state with all that this entails, and another party, the Kosovo Liberation Army, an Albanian band of, quote, rebels, guerrillas, and terrorists threatening to change inviolable borders and engulf Europe in a wider war. This gross misinterpretation of the reality of the Serbian-Albanian conflict, in our view, has fueled the public perception of the war in Kosovo since the Serbian military attacked Ranica a year ago, and which the Western press has kept very much alive until the present day. Unfortunately, we believe that this misinterpretation has been used to shape U.S. foreign policy, disguising the real political, economic, and security issues at stake for us in the Balkans. The decision to deploy U.S. troops, and under what circumstances, becomes easy to deal with if we understand the crisis in Kosovo for what it really is: a campaign of genocide following a 10-year occupation, the most brutal in Europe since the Nazi era, which has necessitated a homegrown resistance movement on the part of the more than 90% Albanian population of Kosovo. Those who refuse to use the word genocide to describe what has been happening in Kosovo are unwilling to confront the fact that the events of 1998-1999 are not unique, but part of a 100-year history of anti-Albanian racism and brutality by hostile Slavic regimes. The decision to deploy U.S. troops also depends a great deal on whether we understand that Serbia is a major military power engaged in state terrorism, and the Kosovo Liberation Army is a grassroots self-defense force that is fighting to stop the annihilation of the Albanian people with money and arms from the diaspora. Those who do not want to involve America in this conflict, or who vainly seek to contain it by subjecting Albanians to ongoing Serb oppression, have worked very hard to establish a false parity between the Yugoslav army and the KLA. The decision to deploy U.S. troops will also depend on whether we think the conflict in Kosovo has something to do with religion. Those who would have us believe that the independence of Kosovo, with its Muslim majority, will lead to a potent Islamic force in the heart of Europe that will somehow threaten American interests, have concluded that the KLA must be crushed at all costs. whether through Milosevic's reign of terror, as we clearly saw this past summer during the Serbian offensive, which was sanctioned by the West, or through the KLA's disarmament by NATO troops. But most important, Albanians are moderate and secular Muslims. They are Muslim, Catholic, and Eastern Orthodox people, first of all, who've lived together for centuries. But I think it would be in our interest, frankly, to have a Western-oriented Balkan state that includes a majority of secular Muslims in this vitally strategic region of Europe. And by the way, I'm surprised that this particular issue did not come up today in the committee's questioning, because it's been a major back burner issue driving this particular conflict. And also, parenthetically, the KLA, in my conversations with them, have consistently refused to take any support offered from sources in Iran and Iraq, precisely because they want to make the point that they want to work to create a tolerant, inclusive, and democratic society. The decision to deploy U.S. troops, it also depends on something we've heard about a lot today, whether we believe that Serbia is a sovereign state with a right to territorial integrity, including Kosova, and that any amount of bloodshed is justifiable to preserve that right, or whether we believe that Serbia has abrogated its right to sovereignty under international law because of its flagrant violations of human rights on the scale of genocide. The Helsinki Accord and other international covenants make clear that respect for territorial integrity goes hand in hand with adherence to human rights conventions that reject the use of brutal force and certainly of ethnic cleansing against so-called minority populations. By the way, I say so-called minority because Albanians are a nation of 7 million people who have been arbitrarily and unfairly divided into 5 contiguous jurisdictions. The fact is, as has been said many times today, following the breakup of the former Yugoslavia, we recognize the right of Serbia, Croatia, Macedonia, Slovenia, and Bosnia to declare statehood, but we continue to refuse the same to Kosova, one of the 8 co-equal juridical units of the former Yugoslavia. Finally, the decision to deploy U.S. troops hinges on whom we think poses the real threat to peace, security, human rights, and democracy in the Balkans. Those who erroneously conclude that the KLA's fight for independence from Serbia is part of a Balkan-wide effort for a greater Albania are comfortable with the current peace settlement because it leaves 4,000 Serbian military and police in Kosova and 1,500 that will control the borders to Albania and Macedonia. But those of us who view Milosevic as the principal threat in the Balkans believe that peace, security, and democracy cannot come to the region until his demonstrated quest for greater Serbia is forcibly halted and the 2 million Albanians in Kosovo are allowed to declare their independence under international law. We believe that the decision about troop deployment or any agreement that doesn't concentrate on ending Milosevic's decade-long reign of terror is doomed to failure. We believe that anything less than the independence of Kosovo will fail to solve the Albanian question. We are not initially supporting deployment because we believe that U.S. firepower and intelligence, our main contributions to NATO, are more than sufficient to stop Milosevic, which was something we showed in Bosnia. And especially given the massive, Serbian offensive now in full swing in Kačanik, we think that there should be an ultimatum to Milosevic issued immediately to stop the onslaught, otherwise we should bomb. Now, if this does not work, if we and our European partners reject this route, then NATO should establish an international protectorate in Kosovo for a 3-year period, at the end of which a referendum on the independence of Kosovo must be held by the people of Kosovo and recognized by the international community. In any event, if U.S. troops are deployed, or should they be deployed, whether or not they're deployed, we don't think this should be happening until the Rambouillet agreement is modified to call for 0 Serbian troops in Kosovo, the immediate bombing of Serbia if it violates the terms of the agreement, and the apprehension and trial in The Hague of suspected Serbian war criminals. Otherwise, we fear that the Yugoslav army will instigate a conflict, disguising themselves as KLA soldiers, and attack and kill U.S. and other NATO troops to the point of driving them out of Kosovo. Finally, the real issue for the United States is not troop deployment, but our failed foreign policy. It is time to put an end to the Holbrook Hill experiment. The former Yugoslavia dissolved because it did not represent the solution to the national questions of all the people that constituted it. and because Milosevic and his henchmen destroyed the human rights of all non-Slavs and committed crimes against humanity in Kosovo. As long as we deny to the Kosovar Albanians the recognition that every other ethnic majority in the former Yugoslavia has been granted, we will fail to solve the Balkan conflict, and our worst fear, an expanded regional war leading to a European conflict involving Turkey and Greece, will become a reality. Thank you.